church calls Mary the Queen of Heaven, right? You know the Bible talks about a false god named the Queen of Heaven. She was a mother. She and her son were to be worshipped. It goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel. I'm going to try to get a lesson done for this Sunday night on that subject. The Lord never stopped showing me things that I thought I knew something about and just had read right over the top of. Tonight, we're going to ask you a question. Oops, wrong lesson. Here we go. Before we start, I want to say grace to you and peace from God our Father and His Son, Jesus Christ. Deuteronomy 19:21. Your eye shall not pity. Listen to this. Your eye shall not pity. Life shall be for life. Eye for eye. Tooth for tooth. Hand for hand. Foot for foot. Is that God's will today? This has not got anything whatsoever to do with the way we are to treat each other. This is a civil law. One thing I would never want to do is use my privilege of speaking to you as a chance to get up here and rant and rave about politics. Sometimes I feel like I get dangerously close, but I try to keep it within the context of God's Word and what we need to know. Why don't there are two reasons I don't preach politics. One, we're going out worldwide live, even as I speak. I don't want us to lose our tax status as a church, but beyond that, Jesus was never political in nature. He came to earth and took no action whatsoever against either the political leaders of that time, the Romans, or even the religious injustices being done by corrupt priests. It's no secret that Rome was bleeding the Jews dry. When Jesus was born, it happened during the middle of a census by Caesar Augustus. Caesar, son of God. That's what he was calling himself when he said Augustus. Why was it important to have a census of the Jews? He wanted to know how much they could collect. I'm watching a program right now, about halfway through it, cut. It's called The Rise of Rome. They were talking about when Romans sacked the temple in Jerusalem. That was what allowed them to financially rebuild the Roman Empire. Estimates run between 45 to 50 tons of gold that was lifted from the temple in Jerusalem. They said, to give you an idea of the size of the temple, you've seen the Dome of the Rock. It's 5 stories tall at its highest part. The temple was 10 to 15 stories tall. It would look down at the mosque, and it was gold.
What they did with the gold? What did they do with the gold?
It went back to Rome. I suspect a lot of it is portrayed in the Vatican today. But that's going to be part of Sunday night's lesson. When Jesus said one stone would not be left upon another, the reason was even the stones that built the temple were covered in gold. They stripped the gold off every last stone. Real Keith, you know that Roman Colosseum over there where they tortured and killed so many Christians and other innocent people for sport? You know, a lot of the building blocks used for the Roman Colosseum were shipped over from the temple in Jerusalem. I've heard Brother Spotty talk and teach about that. But even though the Romans were bleeding the Jews dry to take their gold and their money for the purpose of satisfying their own personal pleasure and the worship of their pagan religion, pagan meaning many gods, when the Jews questioned Jesus, should we rebel against Rome for this? Jesus took the following question. Before we start, do you remember who the Herodians were? They were the Jews who supported King Herod as king of the Jews over the son of David. They were against the house of David. They wanted the kingdom of the Jews for themselves. There's some of the ones that come. Matthew 22:15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how they might entangle him, Jesus, in his talk. And they said to him, their disciples were the Herodians, the ones who were against the son of David inheriting the throne, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God in truth, nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. See how they're setting him up? Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Do you see what they were trying to get him to say? Speak one word against Rome. Say one word against those who rule over you. But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. So they brought him a denarius, about a day's wages. And he said to them, whose image and inscription is this? Whose face is stamped on one side of this coin and whose symbols were stamped on the other? They said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So I think it's improper to preach about political events. In most cases tonight, we're going to have to use some recent political events in order to clear up the meaning of part of what I just read to you from Deuteronomy 19. It's a part of God's law that men despise. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot. And they say, oh, no. And even false, boy, I caught myself sometimes. Even false preachers like to say, no, this is not a good law. This is not a good law. Really. It's a part of God's law that if we used it today, God would be proven wise, and men who are honored by other men, like Mahatma Gandhi. Have you watched, any of y'all watched that movie Gandhi? I suffered through it just to try to learn something, and I don't recommend it. If you want to hear that kind of language, go to the 7-Eleven. Would that be Diet Coke? You know. Jesus even spoke about the religious leaders of his day, and they were under his condemnation. He knew the high priest and the Jewish religious leaders were doing wrong, but he taught his followers to bear that burden. Matthew 23:1, Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. They're legally your rulers. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. When I think of Jesus right there saying they like to lay heavy burdens on men, do you remember Peter's words in the Jerusalem Council to those that wanted the Gentile Christians to be circumcised and start living the law of Moses? And Peter said, we or our forefathers could not bear this burden. Why do you want to put it now on the Gentiles? We couldn't carry it. Mahatma Gandhi, one of his most famous things, and they play it, oh, they love to show this in that movie. He's talking about Jesus. You know, he always had something to say about Christians. And one thing he said, we need to think about. He said, I love the teachings of Christ, but I don't love Christians. They are so unlike Christ. I think he had been dealing with the church out of Rome. But, you know, if you claim to be Christian and you're not like Christ, you deserve to get a bad mark made about you. But the big thing that Gandhi is famous for criticizing God, and I will tell you now, I consider this blasphemy of the highest sort, was when they asked him about eye for an eye. He said, and I'm quoting Mahatma Gandhi, the problem with eye for an eye is that eventually the world goes blind. Lie from the pit of hell, blasphemy, a lie born in the heart of Satan. Let's look at ourselves what God was saying when he gave the law, eye for an eye. Deuteronomy 19:15, we're going to see that this was not a law of how me and you interact with each other. This was a civil law. This was put in place to be used by judges and by government. God not only had religious laws, the law of Moses included the civil laws that the Jews were to live by. And this is a civil law concerning false witnesses, what we call today perjury. God commanded Moses to write this in Deuteronomy 19:15. One witness shall not rise against a man concerning any iniquity or any sin that he commits. In other words, one person is not enough to convict somebody of a crime or a sin. Nope. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter shall be established. Do you know why Jesus said, if you're having problems with a brother or sister, you take witnesses? You remember him talking about that? By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. First point about Deuteronomy 19. This law of God had no intent of justifying personal revenge. God did not contradict himself when he said, vengeance is mine, leave room for my wrath. This was and remains God's civil law. People, Jesus did not do away with this law. What law did Jesus change or do away with? And he said he came to destroy the law or to fulfill the law. Stay with me. It's going to give you something to think about tonight when you go home. What God is saying here with his civil law is that a man basically should be held innocent until proven guilty. Boy, we like to pat ourselves on the back. We didn't invent that. God invented that. You can't condemn a man for a crime or a sin without at least 2 or 3 witnesses. But, boy, if they do, Deuteronomy 19:16 and 17, if a false witness arises against any man to testify against him of wrongdoing. In other words, if somebody files false charges on you, either to the high priest or to the king, whether it's Saul, David, Solomon, or whoever. If any man rises against any man to testify against him of wrongdoing, then both men in this controversy shall stand before the Lord. Y'all know about that amendment to our Constitution that you cannot be accused of a crime without the person you're accusing knowing who you are. You have the right to face your accusers. That's part of our constitutional law. You know where it comes from? It comes from the law of Moses. Our forefathers knew these laws. Both men in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priest and the judges who served in those days. Now, I got to get political with you for just a minute. Christopher Steele. How many of you know who I'm talking about? Christopher Steele was a British spy. He was hired by Hillary Clinton to basically create false accusations accusing Donald Trump of colluding with Russia to fix the 2016 presidential election. President Trump's entire first term, America suffered as a nation for many years because of those lies. It was proven a lie. It didn't stop them. Lie or not, they used it. Judges signed warrants because of the Steele dossier, they call it. Adam Schiff, a congressman from California, even knowing it was untrue, he knew from day one it was a lie. He used it to impeach a duly elected president of the United States. My friends, that is no different than assassination. When one man takes it upon himself to destroy the will of the people, that's political assassination. Deuteronomy 19:18, I want you to consider this thing. The judges shall make careful inquiry, those who are in charge. And indeed, if the witness is a false witness who has testified falsely against his brother, here it comes. Here's where God's law is proven to be fair, just, and righteous. Mrs. Clinton has never faced a single charge for what she did. Christopher Steele has never faced a single charge for what he did. They got away with it. Is that justice? Adam Schiff was proven to be both a perjurer, meaning a liar, and a traitor when he was censured by Congress. But what's the ultimate punishment of censure by Congress? It just means that some of them looked at him and said, shame on you, shame on you. He has faced no consequences. In fact, he moved up to the Senate. Did any of you watch his censure as the vote was taking place? Mike Johnson was standing up there with a gavel in his hand, counting the votes, just waiting to pass and drop that hammer. Motion carried. You're censured. You should be ashamed. The whole time, and I'll call him Brother Johnson, was waiting to let that man know, we know you're a liar. And again, Schiff's political allies, you know who they are, stood around him in a big circle singing songs about Adam Schiff. What kind of consequences is that? Now, I'm going to tell you, if God's law ruled in Washington, you remember on Hogan's Heroes what those Germans would say when something about heads will roll? If God's law was being followed in Washington like it should be, there would be some accounting for all this lying. But no consequences have come, really. I ask you, was justice done in all this mess that has ripped our country apart for years? Of course not. The lies tore America apart politically, ideologically, and caused riots and injuries and even death to people. Only God knows how many dollars it cost the American taxpayers to pull that stunt. And it interfered with the work of a president elected by the people to do their will. But they got away with it. But if it was following God's law, we'd have justice instead of frustration. Deuteronomy 19:18 said, if somebody is proven to be a false witness, and look at what verse 19 says, then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. So you, Gandhi with your eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Liar, listen to what God says. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and those who remain shall hear about it and fear, and hereafter they shall not again commit such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. Life shall be for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. That's God speaking to his judges, his rulers. Don't let people get away with lying in court. I happen to know a guy who spent about 15 years in Angola because he was falsely accused of raping a woman. And eventually her conscience hurt her to the point where she came forward. And you know, even after she came forward and admitted she did it just to hurt him, it took forever and a day to get him out of there. State didn't want to let him go. Hey, he's been convicted. How can you give somebody 15 years of their life back? You can't. You know what happened to her? Nothing. Oh, he can sue for money in a civil court, but he can never get back those 15 years of his life, much less his reputation. If he applies for a job, it's on his record. God says if we lived by this law, these things would not happen. If eye for an eye were followed, people like Clinton, Steele, and Schiff would be getting justice. In spite of what Mahatma Gandhi said about eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, God says it opens everybody's eyes to see, don't do that. It is a deterrent. Look at verse 19 and 20 again. You shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. So you shall put away evil from among you. It's a deterrent. Those who remain shall hear what happened to the false witness, and they will tremble in fear, and hereafter they will not again commit such evil among you. Deuteronomy 19:19, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It is God's law to govern his people. How sad that in America we didn't go all the way and establish that. Jesus never did away with this law. Jesus wrote this law. Let me say something. During the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, people are going to have the free will to sin. and there will be some who sinned. We know that. Scripture tells us that. I asked a Christian the other day, do you think that Jesus will impose the death penalty during the tribulation? During the millennial kingdom? And he's like, no, we're to forgive. I said, really? Really? You sure about that? Isaiah chapter 26, the last two verses of Isaiah 26, we're speaking of a time, here the prophet is, during the millennial reign of Christ on earth. He has come back and established his kingdom. Verse 23 is something you've heard Brother Dale talk about. It shall come to pass, this is during the millennium, that from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another, the Jewish holy feast, all flesh, that means me and you too, shall come to worship before me, says the Lord. Everybody's going to go to Jerusalem. But look at verse 24. And they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of the men who have transgressed against me. For their worm does not die, and their fire is not quenched. They shall be an abhorrence, a deterrent to all flesh. I asked this person, I said, you still don't think Jesus is going to impose the death penalty? He said, well, those people could have died when Christ returned at the Battle of Armageddon. I said, you mean to tell me those corpses are going to lay out there for 1,000 years, unburied, undeteriorated? Is that what you believe? Or do you believe that the King of Kings is going to rule with a rod of iron? When Jesus arrives, the foolishness will stop. So now, if somebody says to you, we shouldn't use the law of eye for an eye, you can tell them differently. What God did in the Old Testament was good and holy and righteous. It's still good, holy, and righteous. And in the future, it will be good, holy, and righteous. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. You have to make up your own minds what you believe about Christ in the millennial kingdom. But I think we're going to see people put to death. Anybody have comments or questions?
I have some, brother.
Go ahead.